Welcome to the Liberty Portal podcast by libertyportal.com, your gateway to a free society. On this show, we examine current events through a libertarian lens, seeking truth, cracking jokes, and providing you with better arguments to advocate for a freer world. The show is hosted by David Rand, political strategist and philosophy nerd widely known as the devil of Montana politics. Henri Pellerin, Liberty Portal founder and editor, entrepreneur, and fitness enthusiast. And myself, Joe Sheehan, filmmaker and Liberty Portal producer. Before we get into this podcast with Griff, I wanted to add some clarifying context to the nature of our relationship. I was one of the founding members of Zesty Beverages dating back to 2014, and in January of 2020, I left the company to pursue other interests, leaving Griff and Liberty Portal founder Henri Pellerin carrying the torch. Obviously, we're all still great friends, and beyond that, Griff has a wealth of personal and professional expertise that make him a compelling guest as we dive into these current events surrounding health, entrepreneurship, and government. In addition, you may have also noticed that Zesty Beverages is the inaugural sponsor for this podcast, and I, for one, could not be more grateful for their support. The team at Zesty continues to do meaningful work to promote fun and healthy living with their products, and this episode presented a unique opportunity to catch up with an old friend and colleague while simultaneously exploring why their support of this show is such a natural fit. Okay, let's get into the conversation. What's up, buddy? How are you?
Wonderful.
Good.
It was a fantastic day, and I'm over the moon to talk about these things that we're going to get into because these are important topics that people should be aware of.
For sure. Well, let's jump right in. So why are we sitting down here today? What caught your attention?
A couple big things have happened in the past couple of weeks. Well, I mean, a couple of things have happened over the past 15, 20 years, but really what we've seen blossom over the last week are what I think to be two pretty big stories, one of which is of particular interest to this audience, I would think, or it shouldn't be too difficult to make the connection. So we recently were made aware of this pay-to-play system that Coca Cola has been operating under. And if you look at what's been going on in terms of government subsidies for food, the SNAP program, which provides 15% of Americans their sustenance, it's about a $110 billion program. About 10% of that entire program is being spent on Coca Cola and Pepsi products, between the two of them. About 70% of that program is being spent on processed foods. You know, we've got grain subsidies, corn, soy, obviously a huge seed oil consumption issue, something that wasn't being consumed, 100 years ago.
When people were objectively overall more fit than we are today,
sure,
arguably.
Sure. So there's obviously a clear cut issue of government interference and influence in a area that is arguably the biggest public health concern of humanity's time here on this planet.
Absolutely. Well, and I find it really interesting. I mean, you point out, give me the percentage again. How much is spent on Coca Cola?
So it's about the total SNAP benefit program is somewhere in the $110 billion range. And of that, Coke is getting about 10%.
10%.
They won't, they're not.
So they're getting $11 billion a year from the SNAP program.
Between Coke and Pepsi.
So effectively, these major soda brands are themselves being subsidized by taxpayer dollars.
It's a not insignificant portion of their entire revenue.
And I mean, I think we all know that the result of a lifetime or even some consumption of high fructose corn syrup, of all these ingredients is not good for you, right? I mean, there was a time when they wanted to ban soda in schools, right? So like, obviously there's the awareness, it seems like generally, that this product isn't good, yet the government is funding it.
There's no question that it lies at the heart of pretty much every metabolic disorder that we're facing right now. And, a 120-ounce bottle of Coke is something like 100 times the amount of sugar a child would have gotten in a year. 100 years ago. Something ridiculous. Something in that.
It's a lot. Yeah.
It's not like that's not that far off. If that number might be a little inflated, it's not that far off.
Yeah, we should pull this up. We'll superimpose it. But the increase in the amount of sugar consumed every year by the average American has gone like parabolic, as far as I remember looking at this graph. It's pretty extreme. Well, and this very issue plays right into the reason why you do what you do. Tell us a little bit about Zesty and the mission behind the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Zesty Beverages was founded in 2016 by Joe, myself, and a couple other folks. To
be clear, he means me.
Yeah. In what is now kind of become a cliche term of the better for you beverage space. We didn't really know that that's what we were doing necessarily, but that was always the goal, right? I mean, I remember in the early days, talking about what it would be like to get bought out by Coke or whatever, like that was always part of the original sort of pie in the sky dreams that evolved into what would it be like to actually capture market share from Coke? What would it be like to actually get people to stop drinking Coke?
Totally. Yeah. Well, and as much as the better for you was a part of the mission, the goal was to be acquired by some big strategic partner, right?
Right.
And get a little bit of that SNAP money, apparently. Who knew?
Yeah.
Just kidding about that. But so the mission as it stands now.
So we coalesced ourselves around a mission, looking at what it is that we do and how we do it. We needed a guiding light. And one of the things that we could all get behind for various personal reasons was trying to make an effort to improve the standard American diet. So it was 2019, I believe, when we really kind of codified the mission to unfuck the standard American diet by crafting beverages with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. And so that little snippet right there gives you an insight into what we do and why we do it and how we do it.
And how has it been received?
Generally pretty well. It depends on the audience. So there are some grandmothers out there that that maybe think the wording is a little strong.
Oh, I'm sure.
We did some in-depth interviews with some customers a couple years ago, and there was one retailer in particular who said if he or she had known that before he had agreed to carry our products, that we probably wouldn't be on the shelves.
If that was your mission.
Yeah.
Just because of the foul language?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I guess so, because I don't know how you can disagree with the messaging behind it.
Unless, he or she is like an adherent of the standard American diet.
I mean, I can understand how you might not like it, because there's, looking at this, like just going back to what we were talking to, this pay-to-play system exists within the CPG ecosystem, the consumer packaged goods ecosystem. It may not necessarily, I mean, obviously it exists through this SNAP benefit program, but it also exists at retail. We're in the midst right now of trying to get some of our non-alc products into, I'll say it, Town Pump. And there are these kind of the nefarious practice called slotting fees. And in order to get your products on shelves at pretty much any chain, whether that's regional, national, you have to pay for those spaces. And it doesn't matter what your product is. If your product sells out, you've bought that space for the year, they won't refill it, And so when you look at go into Town Pump and look at what's on the shelf. I mean, there's
probably a lot of Pepsi and a lot of Coke, right? I mean, yeah.
And that's scary, because there's not, when you look at, let's take away health benefit. It's kind of subjective. Let's look at nutritional value of a product. I mean, there's not a lot of products on shelf at Town Pump that offer superior nutritional value to the products that we could put in there. Very few, if any. Maybe a banana that you can get there.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, or water.
Sure.
You know, like maybe, but I mean,
at least not negative nutritional benefit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, if I can push back a little bit, you know, from a libertarian perspective, one might say, okay, it's a free market. Pepsi and Coke have developed a great product that people love, and they've earned the monopoly that they have, and they have the revenue to purchase the slotting fees, and you know, that is sort of an earned position for them as opposed to an unearned position. The only complicating factor, I guess, then is this whole SNAP thing. Like, you can spend SNAP money at Town Pump?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So then that kind of shifts the conversation a little bit, where it's like, okay, are we giving these entrenched incumbent corporate multinational companies an advantage over small brands in retail? And I think the answer is yes.
So we're not only giving them an advantage, we are systematically dismantling the health of our you know, most valuable resource in doing so. And that to me is, I mean, the bigger issue. Obviously we do care deeply about free market. You know, that is something that we obviously we believe in, we support it. Nothing is, I mean, very few things more important than that.
Of course.
But when it comes down to, you know, what the future of humanity is going to look like, you know, that to me is the much more nefarious aspect of what's going on here.
For sure. Well, and that kind of segues nicely into the second piece of news that we had come up earlier this week, which was that pediatric doctors are now encouraging children as young as 12, 13 years old to start taking prescription drugs and potentially even resort to surgery to fix obesity issues. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a bit more nuance to that, but
explain, please.
But yeah, you got the gist. So it's been about 15 years since the American Association of Pediatrics, APA, AAP, whatever, you get the idea. Mm-hmm. They've been sort of waiting in the wings, not really issuing any kind of guidance, and just sort of watching as childhood diabetes has increased about 700x.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's pretty unbelievable.
Seems to be something they should pay some attention to. Yeah.
To the point where I think it's something like 25% of all American kids under the age of 13 are suffering from type 2 diabetes.
25%?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like 40% of all Americans.
I'm sorry, say that again?
It's like 40% of all Americans
have type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
That's like so much worse than I ever could have imagined. Like,
yeah.
I didn't know that. Like, why don't more people know that?
I don't know.
That's such a huge thing.
I'm not sure why. I mean, but that's why we're here.
That's true.
You know, I mean, when you look at it in particular, it's like diabetes, you know, this pathology of insulin resistance, right? I mean, it kind of underpins every metabolic disorder that we face. It is certainly the underpinning of the top 6 or 7 ways that people are most likely to die, you know, and most of these are certainly preventable.
Yeah.
I mean, cancers, obesity, heart disease, you know, Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. I don't know. I mean, you might maybe I've
heard that correlation applied lately. Yeah.
It is this. I mean, it's insulin resistance of the brain in the brain. You know, it is a misfiring, basically a degradation of a signaling pathway that allows the brain to normally get rid of proteins to shuttle them out, and they kind of aggregate and cause some weird aberrant formations. And I'm not a doctor.
Important disclaimer.
Yeah,
no doctors in the room.
I'm
currently.
Not a physician. But I do have many years of studying infectious disease. I did study prion disease, which is a central nervous system, does affect brain chemistry and biology. You know, these are things that I've spent a lot of time working on in professional settings, and have a fairly good grasp of how obviously degrading they are to human populations.
For sure.
I mean, it's hard to ignore.
Well, it seems that way if 40% of all Americans have type 2 diabetes. That's amazing. And I just made another connection. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and literally every day for maybe 40 years, she drank a Pepsi, at least one. You know, Not to rag on Pepsi directly, a lot of brands out there, but I just made that connection. And I think it's an interesting one to at least like start to formulate some conclusions from.
Yeah, there's the obviously correlation, causation, et cetera.
No proof in the pudding, but
however, that stuff's garbage, and it's we weren't supposed to, evolutionarily we weren't meant to metabolize that form of sugar in that quantity, as often as we are.
Yeah. Well, so what is Zesty doing to change that right now?
A couple things. So, when we started out, we were mostly focused on non-alc beverages, and we certainly still very much are. And as we grow, my focus definitely is on solving problems in the non-alc space. We have a unique opportunity in that we also make alcohol. And so we looked at how we can improve that space. And, let's take away, I get this question a lot, how I can, really clap back on health related issues selling alcohol. And I will admit that I've had to do some mental gymnastics over the years to, to really understand why I feel so strongly while still creating something that is a drug. Obviously, again, I think the audience of this podcast will probably all agree that, the legalization of drugs, adults making their own choices, they're going to pursue these mind altering, conscious evolving, so oftentimes deleteriously affecting substances. However, they don't have to consume them in ways that are further contributing to any kind of metabolic disorder. And so when we looked at ways that we could improve the alcohol space, there are some pretty wildly successful brands out there. I don't know if I need to name them or not, but they fall into a category called fermented malt beverages. And these are things like hard teas or, like overly sweet canned margaritas or, bottled margaritas. I mean, you remember these things, what I'm talking about, and everybody does. And these are called FMBs, fermented malt beverages. And generally speaking, I think cheerleader juice is another good term.
Wonder where that came from.
These are just very rich in calorie, high in sugar, beverages that are contributing a significant amount of excess sugar consumption to the population. We just did some back of the napkin calcs on two of, it's, to even call them a competitor is not even fair. We are but a blip on the radar compared to what, the volume that these brands are doing. But two of the big ones that we have alternatives for, between their two top selling SKUs, just the two top selling SKUs, not their entire portfolio. Based on the volume of those two SKUs sold in 2022, it was about 50 million excess pounds of sugar consumed in the American diet. That's two beverages underneath different brand portfolios.
Wow. So that's just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
50 million pounds of sugar.
Yeah. and there are dozens of these brands, and each of these brands has dozens of SKUs underneath them. And they're selling millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of these products every year, typically to lower socioeconomic classes. I don't know if you know this, but the highest per capita rate of twisted tea is sold over at the Town Pump in Browning.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Highest per capita in the country?
Yeah.
Sold in Browning, Montana.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's quite a dubious claim to fame.
Right. So we look at where we can make improvements. And, the sad fact of the matter is a lot of these people who are picking up a twisted tea, will probably never pick up what we're, the alternative that we're offering. That's a hard pill for me to swallow. But I can't sit idly by when we have a platform, when we have the ability to make these things, when we know we can not only make them taste better, but offer a superior nutritional value. And that, I think, is kind of the crux of it. Like the whole point of why we do business is, I mean, we live and die by the value that we do or don't bring, and humans kind of live and die by the nutritional value of the products they consume, So there's a responsibility that businesses have or should feel very responsible for the health of their consumers. And we do. And that's why we make these drinks.
That's awesome. And in order to cut back on this, like 50 million pounds, or contributing to that excess consumption, you guys use technically artificial sweeteners, is that right? Or what are they? What are you using instead?
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution or system yet, but we use the one that we think is close to perfect. So they're typically, these have been referred to as non-nutritive sweeteners. And so these are the things like stevia, sucralose, Ace K. You've seen these, I think aspartame, sucralose, like these kind of bubbled up. These were some of the original, Sweet and Low. These are some of like the original non-nutritive sweeteners. Stevia has gained a lot of popularity recently, and we can get into why I think that is. But the one we use is called monk fruit. And monk fruit, of all of these non-nutritive sweeteners, it actually does have some nutritional value to it. And so it actually comes from a gourd that's native to China. And it's the same family as a cucumber. And we use the juice that is just mechanically pressed and concentrated. So there's no chemical processing involved in this particular sweetener like there is in a lot of the other ones. And the sweetness comes from an antioxidant. It's about 200 times sweeter than sugar. It's the only one of all of these that there's documented human use for the last 1,000 years.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Interesting.
And so these are among the reasons why we use it.
So it's got long-term safety data, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Relatively.
Yeah. I mean, let's like be honest. I mean, again, this is a product that is only grown in China.
Why is that?
China has some pretty strict rules of governance when it comes to native fauna and its removal from their territories.
Okay. They want to preserve their competitive advantage and keep exclusivity of this amazing sweetener.
Probably.
I mean, sounds like a totalitarian thing to do, I guess.
I know. And that's, here's where we have to, have a kind of make a leap of faith, because most of the work that's been shown, most of the studies that are out there to support its safety and efficacy, obviously they've been approved by the FDA.
They all came from the Wuhan virology lab.
They all came from China. And so, I mean, are these things that I'm feeding you, like, have I been marketed to successfully? I mean,
are we all getting duped right now?
I mean, look, so much as I can tell, what we're using is, in my educated opinion, the best of all of these alternatives in the non-nutritive sweeteners. There is a plentitude of data to suggest some pretty deleterious effects of some of these other non-nutritive sweeteners.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, when you mentioned sucralose, aspartame, I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, that's like got a laundry list of negative side effects attached to it by now, right?
Totally.
And so what about the other ones?
Well, I mean, the big question surrounding all of them is how they are. Well, there's really two. I mean, what they're doing to elicit an insulin response in the body. Because you've got this pretty. It's not that complex. I mean, it's a fairly simple communication pathway between your gut and your brain, and there's some of these are it's being suggested. It's not even being suggested. You can look at the data here. Like there is definitely the wires are being crossed in your gut microbiome and its ability to communicate the good bugs with the rest with themselves. It's called quorum sensing. That is certainly being negatively impacted by some of these artificial sweeteners, or the non-nutritive sweeteners they call them. And there's some evidence to suggest that they are also kind of tricking the brain into thinking that it's getting, this glucose hit, where it's not. And so it's not necessarily, but you're still getting a physiologic response.
Oh, so the body still ramps up its insulin response, but there's no sugar there for it to consume.
Yeah. There's
offset.
Yeah. There's evidence to suggest that.
Okay.
Now, I don't think that there's enough long-term evidence or, in terms of like randomized controlled trials to be able to pull a lot of these things or say they're not, generally regarded as safe, which is, that whole generally regarded as safe thing, it's basically looking to, make sure that this thing like doesn't make you implode. Like there's a pretty low bar to get a GRAS certification.
Exactly. We have exactly the opposite problem though. People are exploding, like
I know,
exploding. So, let's dig into that though. Because kids love sweet things. Mm-hmm. Crappy foods are constantly marketed to children. You see the sugar cereals on the bottom of the shelf, right? Like we've got an issue with the way that we approach children and education and food, and like how do we address that? Right.
So I guess I realized that we went off on a tangent and didn't necessarily get back to what we were talking about with the recent guidance from the APA.
It's all relevant.
But yeah, exactly. So we can kind of like tie this all together. So what obviously we're seeing this what's becoming an epidemic of just mass proportions, with metabolic disorders, obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, et cetera. So we're seeing it developing in a very vulnerable population, children under the age of 13. So the American Pediatrics Association is looking at ways to combat the problem, and we tend, or our medical system tends to want to look at intervention methods that continue to support the medical system, right? So one of the things that they're looking at, or what they've encouraged the use of, is a drug called semaglutide. And even before the APA guidance, kind of started making the rounds, you and I were kind of like texting earlier this week, and there's the 60-minute piece regarding this drug semaglutide, and its brand name Wegovy. And we were immediately, a little concerned, because I think right from the outset, 60 Minutes, or they're doing this piece on Wegovy, and they make no attempt to hide the fact that Novo Nordisk, the manufacturer of Wegovy, is an underwriter of the 60 Minutes program.
Oh, imagine that. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Yeah. So I was curious, and as I'm wont to do with my background academia, I started digging around on PubMed and Web of Science and JAMA and a couple different journals, and was curious where, what semaglutide or semaglutide or whatever it's called, what these drugs are all about, how their efficacy has been tested, why they are being so widely prescribed. And it was concurrently, that basically like the very next day when we started seeing anything about the APA's guidance. So after digging into some of these articles, most of the evidence I could find to support its use were done in trials. The cohorts consisted of mainly middle-age, obese white women. That seems to be, by and large, the demographic that they were focusing the efforts on determining if these drugs had any efficacy. One study in particular was looked at the use over 68 weeks, and the baseline, everybody in the study started at around 110 kilos. So these are like big women.
Can you convert that to pounds? I'm sorry.
I think it's like 222 pounds or something like that. Okay. 230 pounds, somewhere in that zone.
Damn.
That's where they were all starting. They went on a 68-week long mission, sponsored of course by Novo Nordisk, again, making we see that some of these corporations have kind of like hijacked these public institutions of great trust. When you see a peer-reviewed journal or a peer-reviewed article from Harvard Public Health or something, you assume the best generally, right? I mean, these are the things that are informing our policy decisions. So, we assume that they're not being co-opted, but the fact of the matter is their private interests are controlling the design, they're controlling the design of the study. They're controlling the analysis. They're controlling basically the way the entire study's run. So anyway, back to some of the data that I combed through, there were a significant amount of adverse events associated over the course of that 68-week period, something like 10%, mostly all related to GI stuff, but enough to pull people out of the study. The biggest, most of the women that did in the experimental group that did experience any sort of benefits, it was between 10 and 15% loss of just loss of pounds.
Seems fairly effective then.
Yeah, but it's 68 weeks, and these women went from, let's say, 230 pounds to 207 pounds over 68 weeks.
Okay, so when you put it that way, it doesn't seem that effective, does it?
Like when you look at, the control group, the group that received a placebo, they also saw losses. Maybe not as dramatic, but like might they have been given the appropriate intervention? The conditions under which this particular study were done were certainly encouraging these women to live their lives under a caloric deficit, whether or not they were receiving some counseling like every 4 weeks, something like that, like once a month.
Okay, so you're saying that there might have been like what might be called confounding variables
Sure.
within the study that could have perhaps made the result look a little more promising than it maybe actually was.
Maybe, or just, interventions that were completely ignored that could have, shown that there's other ways than just taking a pill. It's kind of funny that, as we've developed more drugs to treat, these emerging diseases, we've got more medical centers, bigger medical centers. We need, a new iPhone. We need more followers. We need more engagement. Like all this, like we're getting more and more. We need more and more, and yet we still continue to see more diabetes, more obesity, more depression, more. You name it. It's like all of the treatments, for these things that we're trying to solve are just continuing to just basically feed into the complex to continue building it. So what we really need to look at is what our lifestyle interventions are, because I think the big thing that this, the APA, and granted, there again, it's a nuanced thing. This is a document that's much longer than how it was broken down by CBS, and there is a bunch of other stuff that we could get into that is adjacent to health but not totally related. The big problem is we've got doctors at the APA unequivocally stating that these are biological problems and have nothing to do with lifestyle choices. I think this is right out of the guidance. And that is really dangerous to be suggesting that parents don't have the ability to shape the outcome of their child's health, because they absolutely do. I was one of those kids. I was, growing up, I love my parents. One of them's dead. He'll never hear this. My mom will probably never hear this, but they were substance abusers, and didn't, probably weren't in the best spot to be raising a child, and certainly didn't give me the, as healthy of an upbringing as I could have gotten. And as a result, when I was 12 or 13, I was not in good shape. I was a unhealthy little fat kid. I thankfully I wasn't obese. As to my knowledge, I don't know. I don't think my blood work was ever, my yearly physicals were normal for a little fat kid, Hey, but it certainly did some, it didn't set me up for good habits going into adulthood. And as I grew out of my teen years and metabolism slowed down, my habits, my addiction to sugar, to processed food, to fast food, to alcohol, all of it, I had no control over any of that stuff. It had pretty negative impacts on my health as an adult. Before, if we can go back a couple years, when I was 19, my dad died, and he, I think the death certificate says something like coronary failure. He had type 2 diabetes at the time. He was on a just range of pharmaceuticals to control all kinds of various problems related to depression and metabolic disorders. You name it. There's numerous meds that he was taking when he died.
Was he always sick?
No. When my dad was a 3rd degree black belt. My dad was a head contractor for a petrol company called East Coast. They used to have gas stations all up and down the East Coast. He built all of them along the East Coast before they went out. He was a high functioning individual, not without his problems. But later in life, he kind of succumbed to the things that were controlling him, that he'd had no control over. That, I was 19 when that happened. That has absolutely shaped, why I do what I do now, why I'm vocal about these things. That was a big turning point for me. It took me a number of years to realize that was a turning point, right? It wasn't like at 19, I flipped a switch. But it plays a big role now. And then more recently, my ex-wife's sister's son, he developed a brain tumor. He was 5 years old. This was, when was this? This was in 2017, 2018 when Cody died. And God bless those folks. I love them. Jody comes from a Mormon family. She's one of 5 siblings. That particular sibling is very overweight, has struggled with her weight quite a bit, as pretty much everybody in her family have. I watched Cody, a small child develop a brain tumor, something that nobody should have to go through, but particularly watching a really sweet little boy go through something like that is really devastating. And to watch his family continue to feed him poison on a regular basis, that was a really, really difficult thing to watch. Cancer is driven by sugar. Insulin resistance is the root cause of every metabolic disorder that we can totally prevent. And so watching these things, watching them hit close to home, and then watching them, happen to myself. 2 years, I guess it was in 2021, was the first time I got blood work done in a number of years. the results were not good. My A1C levels were off the charts. I was very pre-diabetic. The last time I had blood work done was in like college before that, and I was pre-diabetic then, and that was 10 years ago or something.
But you're older and wiser and decided, wow, actually maybe I should act on this at this point.
Exactly. So that was a turning point because, I experienced it through people close to me. I was continuing to experience it in my life. And, the beauty of being an adult is you're just so much better equipped to make those decisions than you were when you were a child because of, essentially this nature versus nurture thing. I mean, I wasn't equipped to make those decisions as a kid because I was shown some poor habits and those traveled with me.
Well, and you're also a child. I mean, children don't have the brain development to see long-term consequences of short-term actions. Kids are kids,
Exactly.
They need guidance, right?
Exactly. And so then what is the long-term consequence of putting your child on these drugs that are, while they're growing, these drugs that are simulating hormones, these drugs that are causing, artificial response of their physiology, while they're developing, what's the long-term impact there versus like giving them some like really robust tools to handle the world.
Totally. Well, and you made a point earlier that, like a lot of I don't even want to say a lot, some of the interventions that are suggested by the system, if you want to call it the medical industrial complex or something like that, just for a blanket term, not to be conspiratorial or anything, but those aren't designed to put them out of business. Right. Like that's just contrary to basic human incentives, let alone business incentives, right? And so you think about what a person can do to optimize their health. It's very rarely the intervention that is designed by or sold by the companies that profit off of you being ill. I mean, you only make money on a pill when you're sick.
Right.
If you never get better, you always take the pill. You're a recurring revenue center, right? And I think where this ties into the idea of being a free individual, being, sort of one with libertarian principles, is that you don't have a lot of control over your own life. You're not setting yourself up to be a strong pillar for anyone, yourself, your family, your community. You're beholden to these external forces to keep you alive, basically, if you're reliant upon some of these things. And, God bless people that have issues that, have to be treated this way. Like, obviously, everyone's different. Individuals are very unique, and certain situations may require this sort of stuff. We can't speak for everybody, but I think you make a really good point that so many of these problems are preventable with lifestyle interventions, with discipline, with guidance for children that don't know any better. And it is for the betterment of all of us individually, communally, globally, to take our health into our own hands and understand, like, you can put a Band-Aid on it with a prescription, but that's all it is, right? Being obese is a symptom of an underlying problem. What exactly that problem is, again, it's different for everyone, but I think in a lot of cases, it is simply, like you said, the quality of the calories that you're putting in your body.
I think people look at a easier, or look at like a healthier lifestyle as expensive, and I think that drives a lot of people away from it. I mean, really, we're talking about some of the like least, it doesn't really, like, you don't have to pay to exercise, right? Like if you don't want to,
you can do push-ups in your bedroom,
like you don't have to pay to sleep well. I mean, you can get like a mattress, Or
We're going to bleep that out because they're not a sponsor yet.
or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, but generally, like those are two things that don't really require much of a cost on your side besides like the time and willpower you're willing to invest in them. However, like what does it cost to, for, Medicare to support a 30 or 40-year-old individual, on metformin for their diabetes? What does it cost our country to medically manage, one individual who would otherwise be a productive member of society? You're talking millions of dollars a year.
Yeah. 1 in 4 people with type 2 diabetes need insulin. That's,
that's expensive.
Yeah.
So, these interventions, as they were, these lifestyle changes or lifestyle adaptations, it's not like it doesn't take adding anything to, your monthly nut, in fact, it's hacking away at inessentials.
Absolutely. Well, and I think if you look at it from a cost to cost perspective, it's like if you are diabetic and you're paying X amount for insulin, and I don't know how much it costs, but is there a trade-off there between, well, if I can get off of the drugs, can I afford better food, right? Maybe there's a chicken and an egg issue there, but like maybe it's something that's worth considering. I don't know.
It's certainly worth considering that what's going to happen to our society in 30, 40, 50 years when we're all infertile. We are all dying at the age of 60. Or how about this? As a business owner, how many times a week are you going to have to field a call from a coworker or employee who can't make it to work because they're getting their toe amputated because of their diabetes? What's the loss? Not only the loss of productivity, but the mental anguish, the physical pain associated with that as we move forward? What if that's your son? What if that's, what's the cost of losing your mom or dad, 20 years before you had to say goodbye?
Can't measure it.
No, you can't at all. And so that's why I feel, at the risk of, coming off as preachy about this stuff, I just don't want to be apathetic about it. I care.
Well, and obviously, you have personal experience with it, and I don't think that you even necessarily have to look at the ones around you that you love and say to yourself, well, I want all of these people to live long, healthy, happy lives and get the most out of this limited time that we have on this planet. That's a very altruistic thing to wish upon your fellow humans. So, yeah. Well, so to kind of wrap things up, what can people do? What can people do to head this off or to turn it around? Maybe.
Let's, my diet's not going to work for the next person necessarily. If you're thriving, you do whatever you want. But how about something really easy? Like put your phone away for an hour before you go to bed. Don't pick up your phone for the first hour you're awake. Like start there. Big things are, really just made up of lots of little things. Start measuring and managing the little aspects of your life like that. You're on a pursuit of perfection, right? You're never going to achieve it, but if you pursue it, you'll achieve greatness, right? So little things. Get some better sleep. Make sure your phone's away when you go to bed. How about that?
Those are great starting points. I actually just thought of another one. I can't remember where I heard this. if I had to guess, it's probably Huberman Lab podcast.
Yeah.
Shout out to Andrew Huberman. Yeah. When I get some shit from that from my roommate, he thinks I worship this guy, and rightfully so, if it's the case. If you, I think it's if you take a 10 or 20 minute walk after your meal, it has like tremendous metabolic effects, like for the better. I'm not sure if it matters what you're eating, to get those effects. I don't think it does, but it'll improve the situation.
Well, certainly being outside is going to, give you a bit of a boost, a bit of a buzz, I mean, I think, how about read the label of the thing that you're picking up off the shelf at the grocery store? When I remember the first time I did Whole30, which was, I guess this was like 2019. Man, I was just floored by the amount of products that have added sugar to them. Cans of tomatoes, there's added sugar. It's like, it's just snuck in, just hiding in all kinds of food, hiding in food that looks like it's healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, just read some labels, avoid added sugar. Easy, pretty simple.
Is there anything else that you avoid other than sugar?
Yes. I avoid alcohol. I avoid grains. And I don't not drink ever. I will enjoy a, nip of tequila here and there, or, have certainly consumed some Zesties this year, we make them. I believe in them. I don't drink them every day. I don't drink them every week. I don't drink, I might not drink in the course of a month. So alcohol, sugar, grains, those are things that don't work for me. Those are things that seed oils, removing those 4 things from my diet. Basically anything that, isn't evolutionarily appropriate to a human. Like, if I removed those things from my diet, which I did, I've seen great results. My testosterone levels are right where they should be. My lipids are great. I'm no longer pre-diabetic. Like, everything is what, I'm happy with the way I look and perform. I'm mentally clear, and it's because I don't eat sugar, processed sugar, high fructose corn syrup, sucrose. I don't eat sugar. I don't consume any grains, don't drink alcohol. And those are, and I definitely don't eat any seed oils. I mean, those 4 things, they made a huge difference in my life. But you do you. If that doesn't work for you, if eating raw liver doesn't float your boat, that's cool. Do your thing, whatever makes you happy, but just be intentional about it. I mean, sounds cliche, but eat for a purpose, right?
Sure.
Be and measure it, keep track, see what you're doing. It don't have to be it doesn't have to be every single calorie is watched, but know what food does to you. Your body is a great indicator of if your diet is working for you or not. It's it tells you. I mean,
For
you've
sure.
probably experienced that.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Every time I drink milk, I know,
Yeah,
maybe I shouldn't do that.
It's probably because it's pasteurized.
That could be. Still looking for a good under the table source of raw milk. Actually, raw milk is legal in Montana.
Yeah,
now.
thanks to
Our buddy David,
Yeah.
and the hard work of his team and all the legislators.
Yeah, I'm grateful for him for sure.
For sure. Well, and like you said, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be puritanical about it. It's if you can make a 1% improvement, you're going to experience that 1% improvement. And if it's significant enough to you and you make a few more of those, I think, it can build up to be something that's really quite significant. So, and
don't be afraid to talk to your friends and family about it. I think that's a really tricky chasm to cross, being open and honest with the people that are close to you, because it might drive some people away. It can rub people the wrong way. So figure out a way to have these conversations with your family.
For sure.
At least the people that are close to you,
Yeah.
people that may listen to you.
Well, this conversation may rub some people the wrong way. We're about to find out.
Yeah.
Put it on the internet for all the world to see. Griff, if people wanted to check out Zesty or follow you online, where do they do that?
Zesty Bev, at Zesty Bev on Instagram is gonna get you, most of the things that our organization believes are important from a beverage perspective.
Just a beverage perspective.
For now.
Time will tell. You have to check it out to find out. Griff, thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, brother.
Man.
Appreciate you, man. Love you, buddy.
A lot of fun. Love you too. Thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. For more episodes, news, and Liberty-focused content, visit libertyportal.com and be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you liked what you heard on the show, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends and giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice.